might be hard to believe sometimes, but game developers do want you to complete their games, because it's the only way you'll see their names in the credits. They are vain, vain people. To get that far in most games, you'll have to muscle your way through quite a few boss battles, a scenario that usually comes with a high risk of you dying or getting stuck, then becoming frustrated and quitting. But not always, because very occasionally a game will actually step in an unexpected way to make absolutely sure you don't fail a boss fight. I'm not sure if I should feel grateful or patronised here, game. Here are 7 boss fights the game will not let you lose. Beware spoilers for the following.
Sephiroth is the final boss of Haircuts and also of Final Fantasy VII. Sephiroth makes your life miserable throughout the course of this extremely lengthy RPG, but you will eventually come to a point where your party is assembled and it's time to face him one last time, with the fate of basically everything hanging in the balance. Sephiroth is enormously strong and difficult to fight, not least because your battle with him will take place across several phases. Also, coming this late in the game, it will probably feature several ludicrous summon abilities that take the best part of 15 minutes to play out. Oh, we're done. Great. The penultimate phase of this fight is against Sephiroth's gigantic one-winged angel form, in which your hated enemy turns into a torso stuck to a fluffy cloud, but a lot more brutal than that sounds. Once beat, it seems briefly that Sephiroth is gone for good, until that is, he spirits main character Cloud away for one final confrontation, a 1v1 duel that is the actual last boss fight in Final Fantasy VII. For a moment, all is still, and then, if you're like 99.9% of players, you will be hammering the X button for all you're worth the very second you see the Omnislash attack prompt appear. This devastating flurry of blows kills Sephiroth, ending the game. But what if you don't attack Sephiroth in this final duel? Perhaps because you think there's still a chance for peace, or because your controller died, or because you fell asleep during the preceding cutscenes. Look, it's a long game, okay? And I'm sleepy. If you do this, the game steps in and saves your bacon. Sephiroth will attack for massive damage, but Cloud will always, no matter what you do or have equipped, counter the attack, killing Sephiroth. But what if you don't have enough HP to survive the initial strike before countering? Don't worry, you do actually, because Sephiroth's attack is programmed to remove only a percentage of your health, so it will always reduce you to a sliver of HP, but never kill you, making the fight impossible to lose. Whew, blimey, thanks game. Now if there's no more cutscene, I think I might just turn in. 10 more minutes?
Die, monster! You don't belong in this world!
It was not by my hand that I'm once again given flesh.
Dracula is the final boss of Castlevania Symphony of the Night, so it's a bit harsh that he's also the first boss of Castlevania Symphony of the Night. That's because Symphony of the Night begins with a flashback to a time long ago when Dracula hadn't had time to paint textures on his castle yet. In this brief prologue, you play as Richter Belmont of the vampire-slaying Belmont clan, right at the top of Dracula's castle, ready to throw down with Vlad himself, assuming you're all done wrecking his light fittings and stealing his sunglasses. When you find Dracula, he sat on his throne and, oh no, pontificating on the nature of evil and man's nature like a first-year philosophy student that's cornered you in a bar.
Perhaps the same could be said of all religions.
Luckily, the solution for Dracula is the same as for the student. Hit him with whips. This is indeed the first epic boss fight against Dracula and will prove an immediate test of your timing and reflexes, especially when, at half health, Dracula turns into an aerodynamically unsound winged hell beast. But what if you do lose all your health in this fight? You restart it, right? Oh no, the game has other ideas. Enter Maria. Unwilling to accept that you lost this fight, the game intervenes and has Maria do a magic spell. And now you're completely invulnerable, and we mean completely. Sorry, Dracula, maybe check to see if the Belmont you're fighting has an OP magic friend next time. With this hilarious boon, you're free to whip Dracula to death entirely at your leisure. Although extremely fun, there is one downside to having had your butt pulled out the fire in this way. It prevents you from getting some starting stat boosts to the game's actual main character Alucard, once you assume control of him after the prologue with Belmont.
No, it cannot be!
I mean, does he know Maria? 'Cause if so, not too concerned.
Great thing. Zebra's preparing to launch with nuclear equipment. They'll be launch capable in 48 hours, and our mission is to prepare their launch. Jaguar 5, hard fire. Good luck. Jaguar 5, multiple bandits inbound. Engage. 2, cheese.
I'll admit I'm no expert on fighter jets, unless doing a great karaoke version of Danger Zone by Kenny Loggins makes you an expert. And it doesn't, does it? No, I thought not. But even I can tell you that whatever the real world of fighter jets is like, it's probably got little in common with Sega's arcade plane sim Afterburner Climax, in which you shoot down approximately 100 enemy planes per minute while doing rad flips and slowing down time for infinite missiles. Being a ludicrous arcade game, Afterburner Climax doesn't have boss fights in the traditional sense, but it does have several significant showdowns with powerful enemies. And the most significant comes right at the very end of the game, when, if you've done well enough up to this point, you gain access to 2 secret levels, at the end of which the enemy launches 3 lethal missiles aimed straight for your aircraft carrier. Where, presumably, your best friends and loved ones are waiting with slaps on the back and moustaches and volleyball. No, your entire knowledge of aviation comes from Top Gun. Needless to say, your goal in this final furious stage is to shoot down these 3 missiles and save the aircraft carrier. Because if you should fail and the missiles reach their target, well, then the game will show you a cutscene where the aircraft carriers easily shoot down the missiles instead with absolutely no difficulty or input from you. Oh, well, good. There's no way to lose this final challenge and no punishment for doing so, except for the game giving you a technically different numbered ending. It doesn't seem super realistic, but then we are talking about a game where you fly your supersonic jet through a series of underground tunnels. I think if you tried this for real, you would die immediately. Oh, well, that showed me. Danger zone.
Wait, where are we going?
Away from the Darkspawn, where else?
And then where? We can't just wander aimlessly.
We stay alive. That's the only thing we need to worry about right now.
Dragon Age 2 is a game people adore because it's a sprawling, epic fantasy RPG with ambitious world building, interesting lore, and a deep combat system. Not just because you can kiss and cuddle your squad mates. I won't have the fanbase maligned in this way. In any case, kissing and cuddling will have to wait, because this game begins with your customised protagonist fighting for their lives, in a prologue that is deeply unsexy, unless Dragon Age players find it especially saucy to be hounded mercilessly by ravening darkspawn across a blasted war-torn landscape. And if they do, that's fine. I won't have the fanbase maligned in this way. This opening serves to introduce you to the basics of combat, and as such is very easy, because it's mostly about figuring out which buttons do the spells that make your enemies pop satisfyingly. When enough darkspawn have been popped, the game throws its first major enemy your way, a towering ogre, your first boss fight, and the next thing for you to practice hitting. Unless, of course, you just don't hit it. Stay perfectly still and the ogre will unleash its health bar ruining attacks. But hang on, you're not dying. That's because every time your HP dips too low, the game cheekily refills it. In fact, it's impossible to be killed during any of this opening stage. Even if you let yourself be completely surrounded, the game will keep topping you up like a particularly attentive sommelier. This isn't a particularly elegant way of making sure you survive the tutorial, but presumably developer BioWare didn't think you'd be likely to notice it happening. Besides, there is actually a good narrative reason for this hard-coded invincibility. This prologue is being narrated by Varric, a dwarf who's being interrogated and serves to demonstrate what an unreliable narrator he is.
Bullshit. That's not what really happened.
Does that not match the story you've heard, Seeker?
Yeah, Varric, tell it properly. Get back to the detailed world building that we're all here for. Also, is that the lowest feedback you want? I'm just asking. I'm just a concerned citizen.
It's hard to be a pacifist in the world of Pokemon, where you have to kick the shit out of several dogs and mice just to get to the next town over. You'd think third-generation Pokemon games, Ruby and Sapphire, would want to drive this lesson home early, and to be fair, they do make it clear at the start of the game that this is the kind of savage world where everyone thinks it's cool to let your child bounce around loose in the back of a moving van. Tiring? We're lucky to be alive, Mum! However, Ruby and Sapphire do give you one early, secret opportunity to make this world a slightly nicer place by sparing one single Pokemon a savage beatdown. This opportunity comes when you venture north from your starting town and find Professor Birch being chased by what we can only assume is a rabid Poochyena. Your mission in this first combat encounter is clear: to choose a Pokemon with which to fight Poochyena and save the Professor. You certainly wouldn't assume there's any alternative, but funnily enough, there is. You just have to let your new starter Pokemon take quite a beating itself to see it. Your starter only has two moves. One is a physical attack like Tackle that will quickly deal enough damage to the Poochyena that it faints, ending the fight. The other is a status effect move that alters your opponent's stats but doesn't do it any actual harm. Insist on doing only this move over and over, and the Poochyena fight will eventually see your own Pokemon on the brink of defeat. Looks like curtains for Mudkip, and by extension Professor Birch, who will shortly be savaged and left for dead by this evil Poochyena. What are you going to do about it, Pokemon game? The answer is to have the enemy Poochyena, with the taste of victory in its jaws, randomly decide to run away. That's right, Poochyena legs it into the undergrowth, despite not having necessarily taken a lick of damage in the fight up to this point. And so the battle is resolved, with no Pokemon having to suffer. I mean, except Mudkip, whose suffering, let's face it, has only just begun. Come on, little buddy, only 8 gym leaders to go.
I felt at once repelled by the blade, and yet
overwhelmingly compelled to seize it.
So, Raziel, here we are, finally.
Soul Reaver 2 is a 2001 action-adventure game with vampires, time travel, and a final boss fight the game won't let you lose, even if you want to. In the game you play ex-vampire Raziel, kicking ass with your Wraithblade weapon. Until close to the end, that is, when, while travelling back in time, you encounter the Reaver weapon, a sword infused with a ravenous soul-sucking entity, and one that, also makes Raziel completely invulnerable to harm.
The blade had a vitalizing effect on me. My physical energy no longer decayed over time, and the wounds inflicted by my foes healed almost instantly. The Reaver had made me invincible.
Well, that's convenient. Especially seeing as at this point in the game, there's nothing ahead of you except several battles against powerful enemies. Or they would be powerful if the Reaver's power didn't mechanically manifest as Raziel being completely immune to harm, even in the very final boss fight against your past human self, which is entirely trivial because you cannot die or even be hurt. There is only one small catch story-wise. Turns out the evil spirit in the sword was, you all along, which you find out when it stabs you horribly through the chest, trapping you in a terrible time loop.
The ravenous soul-devouring entity trapped in the blade was, and always had been, me.
Arguably not worth it then, but also arguably worth it?
Time to go, Mr. B.
BioShock has an interesting in-universe explanation for why you can't really die at any point in the game. Namely the Vita Chambers. If your health ever runs out, you'll be respawned inside one of these fish tank-looking tubes with a decent amount of both health and the Eve required to use plasmid attacks, ready to pop the door open and try again. Many games employ similar narrative devices to explain your character's constant resurrecting, but BioShock's is different from the vast majority in one major regard. When you respawn in a Vita chamber, everything else outside stays exactly the same. In other words, unlike basically every other game, damage you dealt before losing all your health remains dealt after you respawn, which makes sense because technically you didn't die, you just got reconstructed in a Vita chamber.
Time of death? 6:48.
This mechanic represents BioShock's more thoughtful approach to the concept of death and difficulty in video games, prioritising storytelling over objectives completed. It also means you can hit this Big Daddy once with your wrench, die, and come back and do it again, and technically never lose. By exploiting this, it's possible to make it through boss encounters without spending any ammo, medkits, Eve hypos, or anything, every time chipping away at your foe's considerable health bar, knowing yours will be refilled any moment, in a time-consuming but guaranteed path to victory. And that's that! You too can be $75 richer in BioShock without having spent anything of value at all. Assuming, of course, that you don't believe your time has any value. But if you don't, big thumbs up!
So those are the boss fights that the game did not let you lose. There was no chance of failing on these. So if you did, please tell us how. We're actually genuinely intrigued. But are there any other boss fights as well, more importantly, that you have been able to absolutely breeze through because the game was like, you're not failing this, don't worry, we got you. Let us know in the comments below. And for your reward of completely not failing to watch this entire video, we'd like to send you to some more videos over here from us and Outside Xbox. And also, if you want to, support us even more, you can join our Patreon and jump onto the Discord. But in the meantime, see you next time.